And we're facilitating this conversation then, right?
Well, I mean, Sonia's here.
Yeah.
No, I think we are.
I think it's our job.
I mean, I say we take and answer questions. I do a lot of meeting facilitation and I plan it a lot better than this, so I'm not going to knock myself out trying to make it work well.
I'll just say, when I'm done.
Yeah.
When they have questions.
What are your, I think, right, we're supposed to open it up now for a dialogue about what your challenges are, right? Or what data you're hoping to get access to, right? What do you want to see and what are the challenges? Maybe start there.
Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
So, okay. Great. No. Yes.
Oh, nice. Were you at the Do Good Data Conference? Did you guys go to that?
No.
I'm wondering if there's people, that was just in May.
Sounds like there should be overlap.
Okay, so we're going to get started. First off, welcome to Chicago School of Data Days. You are in the Access Gap session currently, 1-3, in the Chicago room. Our panelists from left to right is TRACI SISKA, Executive Director of the Chicago Justice Project, ELIZA MOELLER, Director of the Data Collaborative of UFC, and TRACY STANLEY, Director of Quality Assurance at Christopher House. Okay, and the format will be they are going to present to you, and then afterwards we are really encouraging you to participate as well. So if you have any experiences you want to share, if you have any questions, please get involved in the rest of the session. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to kick it off. So I am Director of Quality Assurance at Christopher House. I'm also the project manager for the Chicago Benchmarking Collaborative. And so I just have a few slides to share with you about the work that this group is doing. So in terms of access gaps, let me just back up and give you a little context of how this group came together. It was back in 2008 that all of us were tracking outcomes at our individual social service agencies. But in sharing that data, right, with our board of directors, we were getting feedback and questions from board members, about this is great that this is Christopher House's outcome results, but how do we compare to similar social service agencies? And that really led us on a search to find benchmark data. And what we found is, right, it's very limited. In the nonprofit world, it really doesn't exist. And if it is out there, it's maybe not apples to apples comparisons. And so this group of social service agencies, we started as a group of 5 and have added a couple members over the last few years, basically volunteered to come together to for comparative insights, right? To track the same data, build out a software that has the same assessments, the same tools to measure common outcomes. So we became a collaboration of 5 in 2009. And so our mission here is threefold, right? We want to build infrastructure that allows agencies to collect data, share best practices, and track program enhancements. So if we're tracking, if we have the same programs, we're using the same assessment tools, we have the same outcomes, we get together for these shared learning collaboration meetings where, if Erie House is knocking it out of the park on their scores in their preschool program, everyone around the table from the other after-school programs, early childhood programs, want to learn from them. What are they doing? What are the best practices they're using? What are their strategies? So then we can take that back and improve our own programs. We want to utilize this infrastructure to increase agencies' ability to positively impact clients and share this replicable model with others. So I think I mentioned, going back to the partner list here, the original 5 were Chicago Commons, Albany Park, Erie House, and Chinese American Service League and Christopher House. And then in the last couple years, we've added Gads Hill Center and Children's Home and Aid. So I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about our process, how we got to where we are today, and how we're using the data, and then some of kind of the benefits we're seeing and the lessons learned. All right. So from a process standpoint, we all signed agreements with Social Solutions to use the same software. And so, you know, kind of the nice thing is we wanted access to comparative data, but another gap was, and this is going to sound strange, but we didn't have access in some respects to our own participant data and information. So all of us were entering, you know, assessment scores, demographics into funder databases, right? That once that child left our programs, once the family left, we did not have the historical access to that information anymore. So, you know, the work that we did with them, we had no way to kind of hang on to that information after a family left. The other thing that was limiting for those of us using funder databases is that we were, you know, limited in our reporting, right? So we could know the things that the software that they had configured would tell us. But if we wanted to run, you know, a custom report, that was a harder thing for us to do. And so purchasing, it's called Efforts to Outcomes software. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's very customizable, and so we have been, and it has really robust reporting features, and so we were able to build our own reports and track the things that were important to us, above and beyond what the funder was requiring of us. So we went through a discovery process where everybody, you know, got around the table and talked about what are the outcomes we want to track together. We worked with someone from Social Solutions who was going to configure the software for us based on what we wanted to track, and then we worked with an outcomes expert from DBN and Associates. And so what was valuable about working with an outcomes expert is, right, she brought in the research as well as did training with all of the program staff, program directors, managers, to get all of us speaking a common language about evaluation, right? Some folks, if they were talking about outcomes, they were really maybe talking about outputs, right? And so it got all of us across 5 social service agencies speaking a common language. So once we agreed to what the common outcomes were for the service areas we wanted to track, we built out the software, trained staff on how to enter the information, run reports, and then we began our, you know, shared learning meetings, and we really, it was a lot of work to do this, and so we phased in each service area. We track common outcomes for early childhood. We have after-school programs that serve kindergarten through high school, doing college preparation, job readiness, and then we have adult education programs, so ESL, ABE, and then workforce development. And so, you know, in our kind of the devil's in the details in collaborating in this way and trying to really make apples to apples comparisons, right? We needed to make sure we were serving the same target population, that the services were the same. We talked about, okay, we all offer tutoring, but when we got into what it looked like at each agency, some folks were offering it 5 days a week and others were offering it 2 days a week, so it wasn't really the same, and so we couldn't benchmark there. But then, you know, some of these questions we had to grapple with is, you know, how do you calculate GPA increases if we all agree that's what we want to track as grades? Do we use a 4.0 scale or do we use a 5.0 scale, right? Because if somebody's using 5.0 and somebody else uses 4.0, we're not making similar comparisons. So those were all the decisions we had to grapple with. And then in terms of just from a software perspective, how this worked, each agency has their own ETO license where they enter their participants' information. And then we purchased this, it's called ETO Community, and it's basically a data warehouse where all of our de-identified information lives. So every day, whatever gets entered into an individual agency's ETO software, it gets synced up to ETO Community, where we can run our cross-agency reports. So we are, using this data to improve programs, to identify benchmarks, right?
To make the reports. And like, for instance, like unduplicated, Illinois wants to know unduplicated participants that visited the lab. So this doesn't do that. So this, a guy could have gone to 8 programs. I have to then put it into Excel, remove duplicates, pick out, did this guy come? And then that's time consuming as well. So it doesn't work very well for that element.
Is it worth it for you?
Yeah, I mean,
that you have to do so much work still in Excel to analyze the data.
Kind of my yeah, I'll get to yeah. So like,
sorry.
No, great. That's great. So the negative is not user friendly, right? It's time consuming to train new staff. Still, staff that's been there for 2 years ask me, Stephen, how do I do this again? Can you show? It's like it's millions of clicking. Reports are hidden that you got to find. It's a massive list. The high cost license renewal upgrades. Every year we go through the same process with them. Please let us keep the ETO. Like, please give us a discount. Yes.
Is there any way to get help with someone outside of that can work with both systems?
I mean, if you call them.
No, not from them.
Oh, not from them.
I mean, some other nice technical person.
I mean, I think if your colleagues at other nonprofits are the best people who've used this before. That's who's helped me.
How much does this thing cost?
I think it's like $10K list price.
So the other room is talking about a collaborative, the benchmarking collaborative, and Erie House is part of that, and the Chicago Commons, Children's Home and Aid. Sound like your colleagues. And
yeah,
so,
I know.
Yeah. So it seems like they ought to get together and, and as the users just say, here's what we want. Let's hire someone to build it.
Absolutely.
And you guys own it. And
Absolutely.
you can license it.
I would love to get something like that.
Well, let's do it. Come
Yeah.
on, that's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
Get your colleagues. Stop the circus.
What's the name of that project?
It's right across it's in the Chicago room right now. It's called the Chicago Benchmarking Collaborative.
Thanks.
The project director is TRACI Stanley from Christopher House.
Yeah.
She's the head of quality control there. My guess is she's your colleague, right? So she's
Yeah.
probably struggling through.
Yeah. I would.
No excuse for it.
Exactly. And that's the thing. That's my last point. It's like, what's the alternative? I mean, this is what we do now because I haven't found. We've all looked for viable
You got people.
software solutions. Like this kind of thing sounds
You
great.
got people in this conference who could code this shit for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. That's.
Without question.
I'm on
They're
board.
here. They're here.
Sign me up.
Well, in the workforce arena, there's traction around building a better data system. The county is doing it through the kind of WIA folks. And the idea is to start with WIA and then shop it out and ship it out to non-WIA workforce providers. That's workforce, right?
Yeah.
And I think you run into problems when you have organizations like yourself that do many things.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's because another thing about this is like our UDs.
But sometimes we look at these cross-agency reports and we all are sort of, we need to improve our scores in one area together. And so again, benefits, one agency offered some professional development to their staff around increasing math language in the classroom. And that was a training opportunity that was opened up to all 7 agencies. 6 of the 7 agencies participated. And I think it was, a huge success. And, after kind of a couple years of focusing on the math and literacy domains, we are seeing that we're getting higher results in those areas compared to, say, social emotional language or cognitive development. So we feel good about that. So just kind of really quickly, the benefits and sort of some of the lessons learned. There's definitely, you know, cost efficiencies of configuring the software together, going, you know, over the next couple months, I'm going to be offering trainings on how to enter the information into the software, and that's going to be opened up to 7 agencies. So again, it's one person doing that. And then also reporting. Christopher House, as the project manager, we develop the cross-agency reports, and these are, you know, lovely outcome reports that each agency has access to just by logging into ETO Community. Comparative data reports are more informative than you know, single program reports, right? We're learning more when we can look across the social service agencies at our scores. And, you know, for the new partners that have joined, I think what has been intriguing for them is just that they don't, this is their words, right? They don't have to recreate the wheel. So 7 agencies have done the work, right? We engaged an outcomes expert. These are mostly assessments that they are required to use anyway by their funder. So, you know, I think it's to onboard someone into this collaborative is pretty easy. I think, you know, if you all are engaged in a collaborative yourself or thinking about starting one up, you know, having a project manager is really helpful to kind of champion the initiative. We do offer rewards for those who get their data in on time and accurately. There's merit funding for this. And we have a memorandum of understanding between the 7 agencies about how we use the data. And everybody's signing off that they're going to get it in real time and accurately into the software. And then again, just kind of, I think an effective practice at the get-go was engaging a trainer to do sort of get all staff at all levels up to speed on just kind of what outcomes are and best practices in evaluation, where it worked for a number of different kinds of programs.
So you've got someone who can do in-house modifications, not just report generation, but
yes,
okay.
yes.
And what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? I think that we should have probably maybe talked a little bit more on the front end about each agency's capacity to track all of the data elements, right? I think that some agencies, the first couple years, I don't have a lot of confidence in our data. And I think it's, you know, what we thought would work in the beginning in terms of who would enter it, who would manage folks to make sure it gets in on time. You know, we didn't, we spent a lot of time on what do we want to track and not a lot of time on how are we really going to do this internally.
You had mentioned that you have multiple different funding sources across the agencies. A, are they aware of what you did here, and B, does the idea of rationalizing the data that they're asking for appeal to them?
What was the B? Can you ask that again, sorry?
The whole idea of sort of normalizing what it is that they're or standardizing what it is that they're asking their the places they give funding for.
Yeah, I think it depends on the funder. So all the funders know that we're doing this. And I think they, you know, really embrace it and love it, right? So the Chicago Community Trust was the first funder who funded the work, and you know, a lot of our funders have said you need to find a way to store this data because you can't hang on to it through our system. And so I think they were really supportive of this. I will say we can use the software to import out of, right? So ETO also allows you to, so that you reduce duplicitally impact on participants.
Did you start as a result of a funder initiative, or how did this start?
So that's a good question. So Christopher, to be totally honest, Christopher House had applied for a grant at the Chicago Community Trust, and they basically said, you know, this proposal would be much more attractive if you could collaborate with some other, you know, peer agencies. And so it was synchronistic that at that time 4 agencies happened to be signing agreements with the same software that Christopher House used. And so it was an evolution because I don't think at the beginning we were all, right, we're all competing for funding, and so it took some time to build the trust, right, to put our scores out there next to each other. But yeah, really, I mean, the trust was the group that first pushed us, but it's also true that, you know, I was at a board meeting where a board member said, well, this is great that this is how Christopher House is doing, but how do we compare to others? So that was also a motivating factor.
Have you seen any kind of indication as a whole the funding will increase because you guys are collaborating and more efficiently?
So we have seen this project has gotten funding from McCormick, from Fry, from Boeing. We convened a number of program officers a couple years in to raise awareness about this project. And really at the end of the presentation, the CEOs made the presentation. At the end, one of the funders, I think from United Way, was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. How much do you need, right? I mean, I think they definitely love this idea.
Are you willing to make the data that you've collected available to other entities, or is it just sort of internally used?
So far it's been internally used, but I think that's something that now that we have some data that we have some confidence in, right, and that our programs actually, we have data that shows, right, scores were low, here's some changes we made, and then here's some improved scores, right? Now that we're at that point, I think it's time for the group to talk about maybe sharing with a broader audience what we're collecting. All right.
All right, you'll have more time for questions at the very end as well. Do you mind if I stay in the chair? Oh, that kid's really crying. I didn't notice that before. All right. Hi, I'm ELIZA MOELLER. I'm here from the University of Chicago. The capacity that I'm speaking in today is primarily from the Consortium on Chicago School Research, which is a research entity within the University of Chicago that does research exclusively on the Chicago public schools. But I apologize in advance for using many more acronyms than that. I'm also I'm going to talk about CCSR. I'm also going to talk a little bit about data available through U Chicago Impact, and I'll also talk a little bit about data available through CPS. So what I've been asked to speak about today is availability of data about schools and what we know both from the university and from sort of the public side of CPS about getting data on schools and on students. So we have some significant challenges and also significant advantages here in our local market about getting information about schools and learning into the hands of the public. CPS has excellent data. As a school system, they are a pretty data-savvy organization. They have a long-standing agreement with the National Student Clearinghouse that gets them data on college outcomes for graduates. They started that data building process about 10, 12 years ago. They were the first school district in the country to really do that kind of data build out on such a large scale, and it's been replicated all over the country now. They're also really good at tracking things like what you'll hear me talk about today, the Freshman on Track indicator, which is a really solid leading indicator of high school graduation that's got a very strong research backing. And they're pretty good about making a lot of that information available to the public. Also, we at the University of Chicago have a 25-year relationship using CPS data and analyzing it carefully to do things like identify what matters for high school graduation and come up with something like the Freshman on Track indicator to try to look at what matters for college persistence and completion and come up with some of the findings around the importance of GPA and the importance of college choice. So excellent data from CPS, a real long-standing and rich community that's been analyzing that data locally for a long time, but also significant concerns about privacy and who can get access to what data, especially at the student level. And traditionally, when you're looking for any kind of school-to-school comparison, you can often find stuff that's out of date, or it's hard to find, or it's hard to use. And we have an ongoing problem with charter schools not reporting data in the same way as other schools. So there's often a spreadsheet you can download that will give you on-track rates for every high school in the city, except the charters, because they don't report in the same way. I can't help you with a lot of that. I am actually not licensed to make any changes to FERPA regulations. And we also at CCSR, as much data as we have, we struggle with getting charter school outcomes as well, just for the reason that they're not required to report to the state or the district in the same way. What I wanted to share with you today are a number of ways that you can get really high quality school level data that's available to the public, sometimes easy to use, sometimes not, either from the district itself or from a couple of different agencies at the University of Chicago. So the first resource I want to share is the CPS Performance website, the Office of Performance Management, or CPS/Performance. I have it on the next slide. So this is the agency that's in charge with monitoring data and getting data out to schools, and also with doing a yearly school evaluation process that is now called affectionately the SQURP, the School Quality Rating, what's the P? Policy, School Quality Rating Policy. So this office, especially when it comes to any indicator that's on the SQURP, there's actually a tremendous amount of data that's made available just by this office in downloadable spreadsheets on the website. So it's a lot of really detailed stuff that you can get broken down by various demographics, and also very often broken down school by school. So you can get demographic and attendance trends, test scores, freshmen on track, suspensions and expulsions, graduation, college enrollment. These are all things you can get right from CPS itself, right in the format that it'll be used to evaluate schools. This has been very recently updated. A bunch of the metrics that are going to be used to evaluate schools in coming weeks for last year are online right now. It's just a website that looks like this. It's pretty basic, but if you click on, for example, the tab that says school data, you'll come to a page that gives you downloadable spreadsheets for a great number of metrics that matter a lot, including that really valuable college enrollment data. Now they're including college persistence. Suspensions and expulsions, I know, is a really big issue right now that people are also tracking. CPS is pretty transparent about data at the school level. They do a pretty good job of getting it out there available for people to use. And at this moment, it seems pretty up to date. There's most of this right now has been updated to reflect results as of last school year. So if you're looking for just sort of basic indicators, I know for a lot of the nonprofit community, it's a challenge. You need to understand more about schools, and it's a challenge to find the right data to do that. So the CPS Performance website is a really good place to start. We also, on the Consortium on Chicago School Research website, have a small but growing list of individual school reports that we can share on indicators that we've found to be really important for evaluating schools' performance. So it used to be the case that in many of our research reports, we'd do a report on high school graduation and dropout, and we'd produce a list of all of the high schools in the city, and we'd show a couple of years of data in that list. But it was rarely updated. You didn't get to see a lot of change over time. It was sort of a really good list for a couple of years, and then we sort of lost track of it. We've done similar things with college enrollment over time with freshmen on track. So what we're trying to do between our organization and also UChicago Impact, that I'll talk about in a minute, is make more of that information available, updated year to year. So what we've been working on is trying to get these very detailed, highly nerdy individual school reports on important metrics out to people. They're really meant to be school improvement tools, but if you are working in communities where you're working pretty deep in a school, you might find them to be helpful. And the way that we do that is the way that you can find these reports. Right now, we just have one kind of report. Pretty soon, we'll have 3, and I'll show you examples of all of those. Right now, the way you do it is by going to the UChicago CCSR website. There's a tab that says your CPS school, and then you can search for a school. When you search for a school, you'll find a list of individual school reports that are available for that school. Right now, there's only one. Eventually, we're going to have 2 reports in short order this fall. We'll have 2 reports on high schools and 1 on elementary schools. So the report that's up there right now is the Freshman on Track report. So this is an example of what you'd find in that report. This is Kelly High School, and you can see their Freshman on Track rate, how it's changed over time in comparison to the district. And then we get very deep into disaggregation in these reports. So you can see, for example, students at different levels of incoming achievement as measured by the Explore score, how have they been doing on these things over time? And the goal with these reports is to get really detailed data that's meaningfully disaggregated into the hands of schools so they can start looking at what their trends have been over time. Looking at, for example, it looks like Kelly in recent years realized that they needed to make better gains with their lowest achieving kids, and in a year wiped out a gap between the lowest achieving and the next lowest group. These reports are really good for that. What's this one indicator that's sort of enrollment? So that'll do kind of the same kind of thing as we've tried to do with our on-track report, but with a different outcome, this case of college enrollment. This is a graph that shows college enrollment for Juarez High School. Go Juarez. And just doing three or more match college applications, what's their projected college graduation rate, and what's their actual match enrollment rate. So this is more detailed than most people would ever care to know about a school's process around college applications, but if you are a counselor at a high school that needs some feedback on, I need to get my college enrollment numbers up, I need to get my college persistence numbers up, this is a graph that could give you some insight as to where you're doing well and where you're not, what you could improve if you need to make different kinds of gains in those metrics like college enrollment and college persistence. And finally, I don't have good examples from here because these are not quite yet available to the public for this year. The goal of a lot of this work is to eventually move it into some kind of online format where you can see a whole school sort of trajectory from 9th grade to college graduation, and you know, interact with it and get more information about the freshman on track rate, more information about college enrollment and college choice. And that's all going to come out through UChicago Impact. The primary information that comes out through Impact right now are the 5 essentials reports that will show you. These are all survey reports. It's now a part of the accountability system. We get really good coverage on who answers the surveys. Teachers and students from schools across the city, elementary schools, high schools, charter schools as well. Survey results on on these 5 sort of critical measures of organizing a school for improvement. And so those will come out shortly, but it's the same kind of thing. You just look for a place to search for a school, and you'll get a really pretty red, yellow, green 5 indicator kind of picture and a lot of more rich information you can drill down into and look more specifically. So those are my publicly available school information resources. I think I can take a couple minutes for questions. Yeah.
So this is great if you want to look school by school. I think often we want to look at schools in the community context.
Yeah.
So my struggle is always the geography is so complicated.
Yes.
So what approaches are there to deal with that?
So give me an example of.
I mean, there might be a neighborhood school, but kids can, choose to go to a different school, and then there's selective enrollment schools. So
Right.
It's very hard to say the kids in this school come from, like, here's the nice, neat box where the kids come from.
Right. Box
Every
doesn't
kid
exist.
Within that box goes to that school. So when you're looking at, say, let's say we want to look at how does neighborhood crime relate to school performance, that's really hard to do because there's no way to match up geographic boundaries.
Yeah, so we can do that a little bit at CCSR because we can take, so the primary challenge there is that student level data is not available to the public. You can't take kids, put them in a neighborhood, map on their educational outcomes, and map that onto other outcomes, and that's for good reason. And anybody who's worried about privacy should be very happy that CPS is as careful about those distinctions as they are, though it's also frustrating as you try to answer legitimate questions that really matter like that. So research organizations can do more of this because they can do things like link student level information to census data or other kinds of crime data. But I think you're right that it's a gap in the knowledge, and I think it's one that we can't necessarily solve with the information we have here. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but I'm not an expert in that.
I wonder if there's a possibility to, develop some sort of like algorithm or matching to be able to make some predictions about, or some estimates of like where the kids come from. there is?
We are, as all large urban school districts are, a district of choice, which just makes it, every year as more schools opening and sometimes as schools close, I mean, like, students don't line up with one neighborhood and one high school and one attendance. It just doesn't work like that. It hasn't worked like that for a long time. It works more like that in some neighborhoods than others, but, and the landscape changes every year, except sadly in the places where the outcomes tend to be the worst. It's a real catch-22. I don't think there's a clear way forward on that right now. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that's done, CCSR has actually done neighborhood level reports using the address data, and they did it a number of years ago, but like you said earlier, you guys don't update everything you do.
Right.
So they did look at the residents of where kids lived, not their schools, and looked at their performance too. We've also at home done work, I think there's a DFSS website on early care and education, and we looked at kids in preschool and looked at where they live and not what preschool they're going to. So we've done some work relative to that. So it's really doable. Somebody's got to really ask it to be done.
Yeah. Someone back there, yeah.
When you talk about access, what do you do to bring these tools out either to the teachers or parents, or can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing all this research and data summation?
Yeah. So that's sort of the crux of my work personally. I'm representing a whole bunch of data tools, but I do more of the outreach. Our method so far has been to look for really effective sort of intermediary organizations and sometimes to work directly with the district itself. So I work for the Network for College Success, which is another acronym at the University of Chicago, where we have a network of 17 high schools where they're convening regularly in different kinds of groups. There's a principals network, there's a freshman success network, there's a college counselors collaborative. So we have these kind of pre-formed professional learning communities where I can, come in and workshop these documents and get feedback on what they're like. And then really that's sort of my first place where I go to start developing the conversations around these documents that we hope will change practice. And then what we learn there, we can turn into some kind of collateral tools about here's a facilitator's guide to walk your team through this college enrollment report, or here's sort of if you're a network district administrator and you want to compare high-level outcomes at 3 schools, here's sort of the 3 things you should look at in these reports as you think about comparing one school to the next. So we do that with our small network of schools and then try to find what are either the right organizations to ask to go out and do some of that work, or look for, the Northwest network of high schools, which is sort of the sub-district structure. They'll invite us to come in and do some sort of training with all of their principals, which we're happy to do. So it's a little bit haphazard, but we sort of go where we think there's a structure there where people are meeting and we can help kind of drive some dialogue. Yes?
Do you all help schools, maybe if they want to start their own research projects, do you guys come out and do some training, or would you help them develop that information?
That's a good question. We do help schools think about how they might do their own sort of internal evaluation. An actual research project, I don't know of a school doing its own sort of internal research. I'm looking at Stephanie because she might be able to answer this question better. So like a full-fledged research project, not so much, but I mean, I feel like there's an important ongoing conversation to be had about how you take this mountain of data that's available to you as a school-based practitioner and really use it for yourselves internally to, drive cycles of inquiry and say, is this curriculum that we're piloting this year working? How would we know? What would we compare it to? That's the kind of conversation that we have more with schools, not necessarily about research, but about how to use data to ask and answer questions that are important to improving practice at your school.
What were the most surprising things that you learned when you were building all this?
Good question. Nobody improves their on-track rate in the same way or at the same time or for everybody at once. I guess that's not surprising. But to really, you can see schools that look like they're having really similar growth, but they're doing it in very, very different ways or for very, very different kids. This graph that I'm sure is really hard to read about, are you enrolling in college? What's your application rate? What's your projected graduation rate? What's your match rate? Those are indicators that I thought would consistently line up from top to bottom as they're written here, and they don't. Schools have really different orders of those outcomes, which really surprised me. Yeah, I think those are my big ones. I feel like I'm worried I'm taking too much time. Do we want to? Okay, so maybe I'll take like one more question, then we'll have time at the end as well. Right here.
I was wondering if there's data being collected on the educational attainment of the parents of CPS kids.
We're gonna minimize yours. What do I need to do to get this to, do I have to pull it? There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is TRACY SISKA. I am the founder and executive director of the Chicago Justice Project. I am also a PhD student in criminology from University of Illinois Chicago and a visiting professor in criminal and social justice at the University of St. Francis. I'm bringing that up because CJP, as being the founder, being an academic and looking at it from an academic research perspective, was really at the heart of why I created CJP. We look at the criminal justice system and the data need, and we're talking about access gaps. Pretty much the entire criminal justice system in Chicago area, Chicago, Cook County, is an access gap. All right. We look at it, we try to push a systems approach. And the reason we push this is because this is something criminologists know, but it hardly ever gets out, is that you need data when you're talking about agencies that work together in a system, as the criminal justice system does. You need data from the other agencies to understand the data from the single agency. Okay, this is a project we did with Free Geek, David here from there, and Smart Chicago Collaborative, and it was basically just an attempt at the best we could to give you an example of why it's important to have data from multiple agencies. One of the things that we've been really focused on the last couple of years is data around sexual assault and rape in Chicago and Cook County. And we've made almost 3 years of attempts to get the local justice system here, and that's the OEMC, which is the Office of Emergency Management and Communications. I'm also going to be acronym filled here. So the 911 Center, the Chicago Police Department, the State's Attorney, the Cook County State's Attorney, and the Cook County Courts to sign on to a task force so that we could have academic researchers at Loyola through Internal Review Board look at case level data to study how cases drop out of the system or don't drop out. After 3 years, they just basically all recently said no. After almost two years and like 8 months of negotiations with them, they basically all said no. Because in the end, and actually as part of this project, I filed requests with them through the Freedom of Information request with the police department, OEMC, the state's attorney, the Cook County Jail, and the only two that got back to us was the jail and the 911 Center, OEMC. They got back to us. You can go on the site and look and click through to see what data fields they collect. But the other agencies wouldn't even respond to us about the data they collect, right? The CPD is championed a lot in the data ecosystem in Chicago and other places about being very open because through the data portal you can get crime incident data. And some people have done some good things with it. The Trib has done a pretty decent job at it, and there's some others that have. But all too often, that stuff gets misused, unfortunately. One, because the people using it don't have the knowledge they need to know to make use of the data. And two, because they just don't have access to other data to understand what it means. And this is why we're trying to push a systems approach so that the data community, which is what our whole organization is focused on, is opening data from all these agencies, but that other people get involved and have knowledge of the fact that they need to really understand any agency's data, you need the other one. So let's get back to sexual assault. We found out that if in Chicago, this was a few years ago, we looked over 5 years, in the late 2005 to 2009, I think it was, we were able to push out that there were about 6,000 calls for service for rape a year in Chicago for sexual assault. Well, there's only 1,400 reports written a year. If you just look at the incident data, all you would see is 1,400. And then next year it was 1,300. And the next year it's 1,200. Wow, rape's going down. Well, actually the calls for service during that time stayed consistent. So what was going into the system, the input from the victims, was the same. The only change was the amount of reports that the CPD was writing. So to people not knowledgeable about how this data connects between agencies would think, and it got into the papers, that rape is going down. But what's actually happening is the calls for service are staying the same. Now, does that mean we don't know enough yet? And that's why we tried to do the task force. We didn't know enough if that just meant that more victims happen to be reporting now because it's only 1 out of 10 report. There's all kinds of complications that go into this. That said, you need the systems approach or you'll never get to those questions. It's not something that's easy. There are consequences for, if you look at, there's plenty of blogs throughout the city, ranting and raving, Twitter feeds, Facebook pages about crime data. And unfortunately, a lot of their rants are just wrong. And this has consequences in the real world. For instance, especially for data people, we're all data people here, right? New York City Police Department got mad. They were sick of dealing with people in blogs using their crime incident data and not knowing what they were talking about. So they just pulled it back. That was it. No more crime incident data. You can't have access to it anymore. And that was before Bratton got in, the new superintendent, and the new superintendent was like, no, you're not getting it. Because he was so sick of dealing with these consequences. Now, as an academic who also studies, does some work with communities, this also has an impact because we know, and there's been plenty of studies to show it, the fear of crime in Chicago, but the misuse of this data greatly outweighs the likelihood in a lot of communities of being victimized. Let that settle in for a minute, because that's not what you hear on the nightly news ever. There was one news report in the last couple of years, because we capture all the news at CJP, another project that's coming out early next year, with Fox News Local here. Mike Flannery did it, and he took all the North Side communities, and he took their crime rates, and he compared them to similarly situated communities in all the largest cities around the world. The North Side is some of the safest communities in any major metropolitan city in the country. Right? Let that sink in. That's not making it through, because one of the problems with only having incident data and not having a systems approach so reporters can take the time and learn what's going on and see the broader picture is that all too often what makes it into the paper, what makes it on the television news is wrong. I don't think the CPD has the political initiative to be able to take it back at this point, because there's so many people using the crime incident data that they can't really pull it back without there being some significant consequences. But it has a huge issue. There was just recently, the city council spent an entire 4 or 5 hour city council meeting dealing with crime incident, about crime collection data, because it's thought that the CPD is lying. And that was based off that whole meeting got called by the city council because of one article out of the Chicago Magazine. And unfortunately, the part of the article that they focused on, Chicago Magazine, was actually wrong about. But once again, since there's no access to this system-wide approach, it's impossible. It's nearly impossible to get, I wouldn't say nearly, let me back up. Since they don't collect data electronically, it is impossible to get data from the state's attorney's office. I don't think there's a single reporter in town that knows that they don't really collect data, because no one's pushed them. We've had meetings with them. They're almost all paper, the largest prosecutor's office in the country. Right, they're almost all paper. Isn't that sad? I mean, to me, it's scary. When I went there and they told me that, I was like, we asked them to run a report. We wanted to know for the sexual assault task force. We wanted to know how many cases they still had open between 2005 and 2009 for sexual assault, and they couldn't. They were all just silent because they have no idea, right? in our earlier report before the task force got started, we filed a FOIA. We wanted to know how many cases for sexual assault got brought in from the CPD from them for felony review over a 5-year period. The head of policy for Anita Alvarez's Cook County State Attorney's Office had to go around to different offices and hand count paper files to answer that question. So there's obviously another huge gap. One of the things you're going to find in the system is the CPD is much like CPS. The CPD is really good in capturing data. They're not very good in using it, despite what they say, but they're really good in capturing it. If we could ever get a hold of everything they capture, it would be a windfall of information about what goes on. The incident data is fair, it's decent, but there's so much more we could know. We got to the consoles. One of the other main issues that comes from this access gap that has to be addressed, I guess I should keep making sure I hit this, is this loss of trust, right? I mean, there are very few people, one right now, that believe their communities could possibly be seeing reductions in violence or any kind, or even staying the same. Everyone in Chicago thinks violence is going up, even though, because in a handful of communities it's either staying the same or it is going up a little bit. No one believes their community, right? But this lack of access and this lack of data we have, and only having incidents to allow people who are interested in making this data available, it kind of leads people to think, it drives their fear of crime. We know that since the early 90s, the reporting on crime has skyrocketed, while at the same time, in the exactly opposite, almost proportionally, the amount of crime, especially violent crime, has plummeted, almost equally. They're completely opposite of each other. But this loss of trust breaks down. There's less participation in CAPS meetings. People participate in their communities less, right? They're less to go to ball games or go to the neighborhood or walk to places. All of that is being driven by this lack of access. And the problem in the criminal justice system is that as you go across this line here, calls for service and incidents are police, so are arrests. But prosecutor, that's a Cook County level. Jail, Cook County. Court, Cook County. Prison, state. So you're talking a multi-governmental system, right, with different leaders. And to make the operation even worse, the prosecutors, the courts, and the jails consider themselves separately elected state officials. And the state attorney's people, top-level people, told us, our task force, right to our face, because one of the co-chairs was Juliana Strand from Cook County Board President Preckwinkle's office, and they said, we don't care that she's on the task force. It's meaningless to us. We don't answer to the Cook County Board, right? Which is a huge issue, because then you don't have to deal with the Cook County Board to get access to these different agencies' data like you can do in Chicago. You have to deal with the Cook County Board, and then you got to deal with all these separate elected leaders, right? So as much as I would love to paint a rosy picture like access is right around the corner for all of this, I don't think it is, even though this community really needs to push for the access. This creates a great burden. There's 250 organizations here. It's a great burden on community organizations or researchers who want to do crime and violence issues, or school researchers that want to look at it, because we all end up having to fight our own individual small battles for small slices of data that fit our research project. When in the end, all of this, most if not all of this data de-identified should be made public anyways. And that should end all of these fights, reduce our costs to getting all of this, reduce the struggle, and probably inform our communities better. I hope that's coming soon. That's what my organization works on every day. It's very hard. We're in the process with Smart Chicago releasing a second site, which should be out in a few weeks, that deals specifically with court data, because it took us, CJP happened to get a hold of 5 years of conviction data. It only took us 15 months, 2 Cook County agencies, and a threat of a lawsuit. Other than that, it was really easy to get. So that's coming out in a few weeks, and we have some coming out hopefully by the end of the year on the police board. That is another agency that's associated with this that isn't in this list. So that's basically my thing. Advocate for more data. Know that you need a systems approach before you push crime incident data and kind of do it about trends. The Tribs app site's good at it, but it's all about trends. You'll see in the paper, I got to rant a little bit more. You'll see in the paper a lot about shooting numbers. Being an academic, everything, data people, everything's about trends. It's over time. It takes time for you to really identify a trend and understand. The CPD, for some reason, decided they bowed to public pressure to start counting shootings, which they've never done before for very legitimate reasons, before you rip on them. And I'm really not a fan of them, but if there's 5 shootings more in a neighborhood over a month, all of a sudden that's a huge increase. Well, we'd have never known what the shooting numbers are, so how do we know what's a large increase or a small increase? And with reporting, if you're reporting issues, people don't report it. So if there's a shooting and you call 911, that doesn't end up in a police report. It only ends up in a police report if someone's there saying I was shot at and signs it. That's it. If you call 911, it ends up as a call for service, but it doesn't end up as a shooting. So the variables that go into small differences in those numbers are dramatic. I could probably do a 4-hour panel just on those, right? But for some reason, the press think that's huge. That's huge, a fact that's incredibly powerful about the police not doing their job, right? And crime is way out of control. It could have just been that 5 more people stuck around the side of the reports. I've been on ride-alongs plenty of times, and we've gone to shooting scenes where no one's there, and it just disappears off the numbers. So that's my rant about the shooting numbers. But trends over time, systems approach, and hopefully we'll get them to open up a little more. So if you guys got questions, I'll take them. You go ahead.
There's a national crime victimization survey,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it doesn't really provide enough sample to do a good Chicago.
Yes.
Although they're talking about increasing the sample sizes so you can do more Chicago level urban area statistics. But that's the only effort, formal effort there is to do something independent of the administrative data that you talked about. Did you ever think about doing other independent efforts to capture crime?
Well, down the road, once we get access, we do want to do 2 things, which is have an ongoing survey, like that measures, that's community focused, but also lets people give their opinions about what they think is going on in the city and what should be done. But also, we'd like to work with community organizations, because in crime, there's this thing called the dark figure. And that is the amount of crime that occurs but doesn't get reported. We would like to work with community agencies, and LASE is one of those on our community advisory board in Little Village. We would like to work with them down the road so that they can be an intake center, basically, where people who call the police but the police don't write a report can go and file something within LASE so LASE can try to start to measure it. We talked about, as part of the Sexual Assault Task Force, of doing our own NCVS's National Crime Victimization Survey. We're doing our own as part of that. It's really expensive. Ideally, that would probably be some of the best way to address it. There is also this issue that not everything that people think is a crime is a crime. So how to filter that responsibly? Because we want our data not only to be trusted by everyone in this room, but we want it to be trusted by the system. We want it to be trusted as much as possible by the agencies and by the agents of those agencies that are listed here. Because they understand, most of the good people in those agencies understand that there's issues with the numbers that get released. I've been in a class for my grad work with someone from the data department of the Chicago Police Department, and he said this, he goes, hey, what I sent up to the 5th floor, which is where the superintendent's offices and the media people are, what I sent up was right. I have no control over what winds up in the paper. And we're like, oh, does that mean it was wrong? He goes, I have no control over what ends up in the paper. What I sent up was right. You know, this is going back about 5-6 years ago, but even them internally know that some of it's being massaged. So I just haven't figured out a way to do that completely responsibly and ethically, I guess.
I actually just wanted to kind of make a point. I've worked with TRACI, so when we're talking about data and about access gaps, one really, really important thing to remember is that all this data is a reflection of policy and practice. Oh, crime's up. Oh, well, we also added 20 more beat officers.
Right.
Oh, prostitution's down. Oh, actually, the Chicago police as an internal policy did not pursue prostitution as aggressively as it used to. All the data that we're looking at is an artifact of a set of rules and institutions and on-the-ground practice. And so you always have to think about that when you're looking at this stuff, whether it's school data, whether it's crime data, whatever it is. And going to the point about the National Crime Victimization Survey, that's why it's so important. If you're a funder, fund survey research, fund stuff that's independent of what these agencies are collecting. Because in the case of schools, charter schools are exempt from FOIA. So there's a lot of data out there that we don't know about what's happening amongst Chicago school kids. So do independent data collection. It's expensive, it's hard, it's really difficult. That's my point.
Yeah, in the back, go ahead.
Up until about a week ago, I was under the impression there was no court watch in Chicago, but then one of our aldermen called in a newspaper article for the court watch to be more active. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yeah, that's run out of the CAPS department. So each district has a CAPS officer, and it depends on what programs they run.
Is there anything to do it outside of CAPS?
Not that I know of. I mean, it probably should be done, but not that I know of outside of it. People like going to their CAPS meetings.
Yeah. You glanced off of something that's pretty well known in analysis and programming, which is that ownership of data is extremely political. The key to the filing cabinet is power in the department, in the organization, whatnot. And when you begin to tear down some of those walls, you can hit tremendous political resistance inside the organization, because you have to say, no, this is not your data, this is not your department's data, this data is the property of the entire organization. And organizational politicking and so forth. In your case, there's the other side also of the politicking of the organization versus the outside world. But this kind of stuff can get extremely political immediately.
Yeah.
And that's something somebody needs to know before trying to get into the swamp.
Well, no, we've taken it into account, and it's funny how all the agencies, they don't want to give up their data, but they want the other agency's data. So we thought with the task force, if we put them all together and promised them all they would get each other's data, besides us just getting it, they'd be more apt to do it. The police and prosecutors, though, started talking to each other, and they both said, let's just both say no, so that we don't have to worry about giving up their data. So we'll see. We're going to see them both in court. So we'll see. Yeah.
Some of this discussion, I think, points up some very serious limitations on use of data. I mean, we're all interested in data, but the fact of the matter is, it's all very well and fine to come up with interesting insights and statistics, but it may not change anything on the ground in that there are deep-seated structures. I'll give you one example. Illinois, I believe, has the highest number of local government entities in the country. Some of the problems with collecting data in Illinois are related to those kinds of structures. We're just vastly over-governed, and authority is way too divided, and the data is also way too divided. So, you know, a lot of these limitations and access are related to these very deep structures that are really quite resistant to change. They're so heavily embedded in the history of our state.
I agree. I mean, that's what we encountered dramatically with the state's attorney. We encountered it dramatically. We had someone from the clerk's office when we were trying to originally get this, negotiate the data agreement with the judge's office for the next project that's coming out. And she turned to me and said, we don't want any more data online than there is, so get out of here. You know, and the judge's office had to remind her that it's their data, But it still took them they just ignored the request for 15 months. And then they didn't want to wind up in court, so they finally gave up the data, but then they took data out of it. So if it takes you so long to get it, it's almost impossible, you know, to really fight for it. We have too many of these people are elected officials too. That's part of the problem.
Tracy, thanks for your work and this really interesting presentation. I was wondering if you and maybe the other panelists would be interested in talking. You said that the media misreports the statistics, and that can be a barrier for just releasing data and public access. Can you talk a little bit about what you think we could do to solve that?
You know, I proposed, and I'm trying to get funded, at least from the CRIM, and I'll let them talk. I really want to do a training where we go bit by bit with authorities from the police department, the prosecutor's office, the courts, and let them talk about what all these bits and data points actually mean, at least in their work, and when someone puts in a 1 in that box, what it means to the person putting the 1 in there. And then to hopefully get the reporting to more reflect at least what the police think. Now, I don't want the media to be a hand of any of these agencies, but having more intimate knowledge about what all this means will probably help that situation and bridge the gap a little bit.
Yeah, I think in education reporting, we don't have a problem of reporting bad statistics. We have a problem of bad discussion of what those statistics means. So, we have this idea, and Chicago is so transparent with their data, it almost creates a different kind of problem, although a problem I'm really happy to have given what you're dealing with. We think we can, you know, produce a spreadsheet and rank everybody on one indicator, and now we think we know what that means, but very rarely do we really understand what that means. You know, so for example, just something as simple as, for a long time we've been debating what actually does a graduation rate mean. You know, so 75% of the kids from this school graduate from high school. Is it a 4-year or a 5-year graduation rate? Is it the way the state used to calculate graduation rates, or is it the governor's graduation rate, or is it a cohort graduation rate? These are all really meaningful distinctions, and oftentimes when we said graduation rate, people thought that meant something that it didn't. And I think, you know, we're getting better at a lot of that stuff. But I think the 75% is virtually always correct when it ends up in the paper, but the next 4 sentences are you know, really susceptible to sort of bad interpretation. And I think we're really getting into a problem with this as we, you know, take something across 75 high schools in the city and rank them. This discussion about, like, this high school is better than that high school because here's the indicator and they're doing better, with sort of inadequate attention paid to context and differences in incoming achievement, and to whatever extent we can accurately measure growth, which is really hard. That is a conversation that we are not having in education in Chicago. I think we're trying, and people are really trying to move towards those kinds of metrics, but it's still, you know, I am a big fan of pretty much every indicator on the school quality rating policy, the SCORP. But, you know, when that policy comes out, just like every other kind of school performance policy we've ever had in Chicago or anywhere else, I could probably rank order the high schools right now. And I could probably do it based on the incoming achievement of their entering classes. So, you know, how far are we really getting in using data to really have the conversation about who's doing better or worse given context? I feel like that's where we're really susceptible to a poorly informed public discussion.
So actually we're about to start the next session. I'm so sorry to cut you off, but what I want to say is that we have a bunch of breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are to go into and continue these conversations after the session time. So please feel free to use it, and let's thank our panelists here.
Cool. It's really interesting stuff. I didn't know about that benchmarking project.
Oh my God, I just took too long. I'm so sorry.
No, you didn't. No, I think you were totally within the. No, I don't think you talked longer than either of the rest of us did. No, it's really interesting. It's so needed in service agencies.
Yeah. I mean, like what you've got, right, with school data.
Yeah.
I would love it if that existed for nonprofits.
Yeah.
I love that. I didn't mean to cut it off.
No,
But
is anyone coming up? Is this your computer? This is our computer. Do you intend to upload presentations?